Hello. This is going to be part two of the reading of the Citizens Almanac, and I took a little break, and a thought came to my mind. I'm in the process of emailing somebody from the Community Relations Outreach Department of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and I'll share with you my email that I proposed, and just I skimmed it over and I not skimmed it over, but I reread it a few times just to make sure that it's sound and it's reasonable. Um, Greetings to whoever it may concern. My name is Oleg Kidukain, and I just started to read the Citizens Almanac, which was provided to me upon my naturalization back in March 2011. It is really interesting. It is a really interesting read. I'm finding some information here quite new. Some I learned in the public school system, and then some in the community college that I attended. I'm currently recording my reading as it might be interesting to share with some of the people on the internet that I have that watch some of my video work that I do on YouTube. The reason I'm contacting you right now is that I'm considering to make a run for New Jersey State Assembly District 36, and given my current observation of the public school system teaching civics, is severely neglected, if not absent, in my particular hometown, one town of many that I plan on representing from grades 2 to graduating high school. There was only one incident where we had a civics subject, and that was in fourth grade. The statistical data also suggests that as there has never been 80% or 90% or higher voter turnouts, I feel is the result of the people not having a civic understanding. It would be extraordinarily helpful for my proposed campaign when I begin to be able to personally hand these out to some of the resident citizens. I strongly believe there is a growing disconnect between the citizenry and the government, and I feel that one of the problems for that is the neglect in public education. Uh, is there a way that I could get many of these booklets? Um, I would need about at least, I didn't write this, but I'm just telling you, I would need at least 50,000. But I would not. And then at first maybe take 1,000, and then see how that goes. Statistically speaking, there ought to be at least 100. I don't want to share my some. I don't want to. Okay. Statistically speaking, there ought to be at least 130, 140,000 residents over the age of 18. Not sure how many citizens, but that is besides the point in my opinion. I feel that you would agree, immigrant, resident, citizen, or whatever. This is important for everyone to know. In my district that I plan on going door to door over the course of the next 14 months, as the election is in November of 2013. Obviously, I would exercise the best judgment and not recklessly scatter them around. One per household is enough. This might be a great opportunity for me to get some assistance from other agencies that have their own agendas in play, as well as we're all trying to do the right thing for the people. That is the goal, isn't it? I look forward to hearing from whoever. Have a nice day. Sincerely, Oleg Kirukain. Send. And we will be resuming. So I'd say civics is very interesting. I don't know. I think it's very interesting. Just 1 second. Okay, we will be resuming now with the Gettysburg Address, 1863. Abraham Lincoln. Considered one of the most important speeches in American history, Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address successfully expressed the principles of liberty and equality that the United States was founded upon, and proudly honored those that fought and perished for the survival of the Union. During his remarks, he spoke of a new birth of freedom for the nation. Lincoln delivered the speech at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery at Gettysburg on November 19, 1863. The entire speech lasted just 2 minutes. The Battle of Gettysburg took place July 1 to 3, 1863, in the rural town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, roughly 50 miles northwest of Baltimore, Maryland. Confederate forces led by General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia invaded Union territory, seeking to take a war out of Virginia and put the Union Army in vulnerable defensive positions. Position. General Lee's soldiers fought the um, General Lee's soldiers fought the Union's Army of the Potomac Potomac under the command of General George C. Meade. When the fighting ended on July 3rd, the two sides suffered more than 45,000 casualties, making it one of the bloodiest battles to date. Confederate forces retreated back to Virginia on the night of July 4th, 1863, and the battles of Gettysburg is considered by most scholars to be the turning point in the American Civil War. And here's the photo. Gettysburg Address. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in the great Civil War, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave us the last measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. This was by Abraham Lincoln. The next one is the Four Freedoms. Right? Yes. Franklin D. Roosevelt. In January 1941, as much of Europe had fallen victim to the advancing army of Nazi Germany, Franklin D. Roosevelt began his unprecedented third term as President of the United States. Great Britain was finding it increasingly difficult to hold off the aggressive German army, and Roosevelt considered the Germans to be a significant threat to U.S. national security. During his annual State of the Union address on January 6, 1941, Roosevelt pledged his support for Great Britain by continuing aid and increasing production of war industries in the United States. By aiding in the war effort, Roosevelt explained that the United States would be protecting the universal freedoms and liberties to which all people are entitled, not just Americans. In his speech, Roosevelt staunchly defended democracy around the world and stated that the United States would not be intimidated by the threats of dictators. He concluded by eloquently describing 4 essential human freedoms that the United States hoped to secure and extend to all individuals. These universal freedoms were freedom of speech and expression, freedom of every person to worship God in his own way, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. In 1943, following America's entry into World War II, artist Norman Rockwell captured the idea of these 4 basic freedoms in a series of paintings published in the popular magazine The Saturday Evening Post. The paintings served as the centerpiece of an exhibition that toured the United States to help raise money for the war effort. And I have a photo here of Franklin D. Roosevelt. And here's just another photo. I'll read you what he wrote here. But this photo is President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivering his State of the Union address before a joint session of Congress. January 6th, 1941. Excerpts. I address you, the members of the 77th Congress, at the moment unprecedented in the history of the Union. I use the word unprecedented because at no previous time has American security been as seriously threatened without as it is today. As a nation, we may take pride in the fact that we are soft-hearted, but we cannot afford to be soft-headed. Just as our national policy in internal affairs has been based upon decent respect for the rights and dignity of all of our fellow men within our gates, so our national policy in foreign affairs has been based on a decent respect for the rights and dignity of all nations, large and small, and the justice of morality must and will win in the end. In the future days, which we seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon four essential human freedoms. The first freedom, the first is the freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is the freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is the freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understanding which will secure to every nation a healthy peacetime for life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world. That is no vision of a distant millennium. It is a definite basis for a kind of a world attainable in our own time and generation. That kind of world is the very antithesis of the so-called new order of tyranny which the dictators seek to create with the crash of a bomb. To that, a new order we oppose the greatest conception, the moral order. A good society is able to face schemes of world domination and foreign revolutions alike without fear. Since the beginning of our American history, we have been engaged in change, in a perpetual peaceful revolution which goes on steadily, quietly adjusting itself to changing conditions, without the concentration camp or the quick lime in the ditch. The world order which we seek is the cooperation of free countries working together in a friendly, civilized society. This nation has placed its destiny in the hands and heads and hearts of its millions of free men and women, and its faith in freedom under the guidance of God. Freedom means supremacy of human rights everywhere. Our support goes to those who struggle to gain those rights or keep them. Our, sorry, our strength is our unity of purpose. To that high concept, there can be no end save victory. The inaugural address, John F. Kennedy, 1961. In 1960, John F. Kennedy defeated Richard M. Nixon to become the 35th President of the United States, a World War II hero and a former representative and senator from Massachusetts. Kennedy and his young family brought an optimistic, youthful spirit to the White House. At the time, America's Cold War struggle with the communist-led Union of Soviet Socialist Republic was becoming increasingly volatile around the world. From Germany to Cuba to Southeast Asia, tension between the US-supported forces and the Soviet-supported forces threatened to unleash a devastating nuclear exchange. On January 20th, 1961, Kennedy delivered his inaugural address on the steps of the US Capitol in Washington, D.C. His remarks focused on the critical foreign policy issues of the time. In stating that the United States would pay any price, bear any burden, he was signaling American resolve to support the forces of freedom in the face of communist challenge. Kennedy, however, also presented an alternate vision, calling on the Soviets and Americans to pursue arms control, negotiations, and the struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. As a young president, Kennedy saw himself as part of a new generation of Americans, and he was not afraid to ask his generation to work toward a better world. In the most famous part of the speech, Kennedy challenged Americans to move beyond self-interest and work for their country. saying, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." I was always curious. I've had this thought in my head for a while now, and I knew a president said this quote, and it was John F. Kennedy. Uh, yeah, okay. I'm going to show you this picture. I guess this is his inaugural photo. No, oh no. He's delivering his inaugural address, January 20th, 1961. And here's a nice, beautiful photo of him. Excerpts. And this is the part of the speech. We observe today not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom, symbolizing an end as well as beginning, signifying renewal as a change, as well as a change. For I have sworn before you and Almighty God the same solemn oath to our forebears prescribed nearly a century and 3/4 ago. The world is very different now, for man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. And yet the same revolution, awry beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. The belief that the rights of a man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. We dare not forget today that we are the years of that first revolution. Let the word go forth from this time and place, to friend and foe alike, that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans. Born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed, and to which we are committed today at home and around the world. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and success of liberty. In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it, and the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us here the same high standards of, ask ask of us here the same high standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you, with a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history and the final judge of our deeds. Let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on the earth God's work must truly be our own. I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr., 1963. And here's a photo. On August 28th, 1963, nearly 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. as part of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The demonstrators marched from Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial, where individuals from all segments of society called for civil rights and equal protections for all citizens, regardless of color or background. The last speaker of the day was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose "I Have a Dream" speech encompassed the ideals set forth in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. King's message of freedom and democracy for all people of all races and backgrounds is remembered as the landmark statement of the civil rights movement in the United States. Demonstrators at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in Washington, D.C., August to 28th, 1963. The photo, I'm sorry. The following year, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited segregation in public places, provided for the integration of public schools and facilities, and made employment on the basis of race or ethnicity illegal. This act was the most comprehensive civil rights legislation since the Reconstruction era following the American Civil War. And then the excerpts. I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that many of our four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with the new meaning. My country, this of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside let the freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men and Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. It is a very powerful speech. Some of these speeches I want to really go into character, but I have neighbors and remarks at the Brandenburg Gate in 1987, Ronald Reagan. On June 12, 1987, President Ronald Reagan delivered a formal address to the people of the West Berlin in front of the Brandenburg Gate, a once proud symbol of German unity. At the time, a wall surrounding West Berlin separated the city from East Berlin and other areas of East Germany. The barrier, known as the Berlin Wall, was heavily guarded, and East Germany's communist government did not allow its people access to West Berlin. The Berlin Wall was a symbol of the tyranny that restrained freedom and individual liberty throughout the communist bloc of Eastern Europe. Because of the gate's proximity to East Berlin, Reagan's speech could be heard on the eastern side of the wall as well. In his remarks, he spoke out of the increasing divide between the freedom and the prosperity of the West and the political slavery of the communist Eastern Europe, dominated at the time by the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republic. Reagan imagined a world in which the East and the West were united in freedom rather than oppression. He believed that ultimately totalitarianism and oppression could not suppress the freedoms that are entitled to all individuals. Reagan's direct challenge to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, saying, "If you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and the Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," is considered by many to have affirmed the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the communist stronghold over Eastern Europe. Excerpts. Behind me stands a wall that encircles the free sectors of the city, part of a vast system of barriers that divide the entire continent of Europe. From the Baltic south, those barriers cut across Germany in a gash of barbed wire, concrete dog runs, and guard towers. Farther south, there may be no visible, no obvious wall, but there remain armed guards and checkpoints all the same. Still a restriction on the right to travel, still an instrument to impose upon ordinary men and women, and the will of totalitarian state. Yet it is here in Berlin where the wall emerges most clearly. Here, cutting across your city, where the news photo and the television screen have imprinted this brutal the vision of a continent upon the mind of the world. Standing before the Brandenburg Gate, every man is a German, separated from his fellow men. Every man is a Berliner, forced to look upon a scar. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate, Mr. Gorbachev. Open this gate, Mr. Gorbachev. Tear down this wall. We're moving on to the fundamental documents of the American democracy. In its most basic form, the U.S. system of government is a mutual agreement between the people and the government to ensure that individual liberties are maintained and continue to prosper under a free society. This idea was established upon the signing of the Mayflower Compact by some of America's first settlers. The Pilgrims. In 1620, the Declaration of Independence, signed on July 4, 1776, listed America's reason for independence from Great Britain, but also further explained the rights of free people and how they should live under responsible government. As it developed into a nation based upon the firm foundation of the Constitution, the United States government has continued to adapt in order to live up to its promise of liberty and equality for all individuals. The Federalist Papers, written between 1787 and 1788, give today's citizens a remarkable look into the framing of our government more than 200 years ago. Through the Bill of Rights and the 17 subsequent amendments, the Constitution has been changed over the years to solidify America's promise of liberty for all of its citizens. The following section introduces you to these and other important documents that have helped to make the United States the land of opportunity it is today. The Mayflower Compact, 1620. In the late 1500s, several religious groups in England wanted to establish a new church completely independent from the Church of England. These individuals were called separatists and were often persecuted because of their religious practice and beliefs. One of these groups became known as the Pilgrims. After continuously being denied the right to establish their own church in England, the Pilgrims decided to move their families to Holland. While Holland allowed them to worship freely, the Pilgrims soon began to miss the language and the customs of life in England. After much discussion, the Pilgrims decided to move the entire community to America, where they could practice their religious beliefs and still maintain an English lifestyle. On September 6, 1620, their ship called the Mayflower set sail for America. 2 months later, the Pilgrims landed off the coast of Massachusetts, much further north than they originally intended, since this land was outside the jurisdiction of the Virginia colony's government in Jamestown. The group agreed to draft a social contract for self-government based on the consent of the governed and majority rule. All male adults signed the contract and agreed to be bound by its rules. This agreement became known as the Mayflower Compact and was the first act of European self-government in America. The concept that government is a form of covenant between the two parties, the government and the people, was a major source of inspiration to the framers of the United States Constitution. The Mayflower Compact. And here's the photo. The Mayflower Compact. We, whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, etc., having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these present solemnly and mutually in the presence of God, and one of another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for a better ordering and preservation for furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness whereof we have hereunder subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the end of the reign of our sovereign Lord King James, of England, France, and Ireland, the 18th, and Scotland of the 54th, Anno Domini 1620. I didn't. When I'm doing this, I don't want to give any of my own opinions or anything like that. I just want to go with this. But with this, I have to say the way that this has been written, it's just so amusing for me personally. Like the way that all the wording of it, they just simply wanted like, we'll do whatever you want. We just want to practice our religion, whatever. Just yeah. Just practice our own religion. I'm gonna just note this. I'm gonna show this to a friend today. I'm just gonna read this out to a friend. Just sidetrack. These things are wonderful. You can just for footnotes for. All right. The Declaration of Independence, 1776. Following the end of the French and Indian War in 1763, the Great Britain established itself as the dominant power in North America. The victory greatly increased the British presence in North America, but left the British government with a significant amount of debt. Frustrated by what was perceived as a lack of cooperation during the French and Indian War, Great Britain demanded that at the very least the colonists should pay for the cost of their own government and security. The British began tightening control over the colonies by bypassing colonial legislatures and imposing direct taxes and laws that angered many American colonists. In 1764, the Sugar Act was enacted by the British Parliament and became the first law with the specific goal of raising money from the colonies. This law was followed by the Currency Act, which prohibited the colonies from issuing their own currency. The Quartering Act, which required the colonies to provide housing and supplies for British troops. And the Stamp Act, which directly taxed the colonies by requiring all documents and packages to obtain a stamp showing that the tax had been paid. Violations of these acts often led to harsh punishments by British-appointed judges without the consent of local juries. American colonists responded to these acts with organized protest, arguing against taxation without proper representation in Parliament. They believed that the strong measures enacted by the government violated their right as British citizens. The colonists also believed that the government should not interfere in the daily lives of its citizens, but should serve to secure and protect the liberty and property of the people. On September 5, 1774, delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies convened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania for the First Continental Congress. During the meetings, they prepared a petition called the Declaration of Rights and Grievances for King George III, King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. They also established the Association of 1774, which urged the colonists to avoid using British goods. Before adjourning, the delegates planned for a Second Continental Congress to meet on May 10, 1775, in case the British failed to respond adequately to its petition. The Second Continental Congress convened in May 1775, and following much debate, agreed that reconciliation with Britain was impossible. On June 7, 1776, Virginia delegate Richard Henry Lee called for a resolution of independence. Congress then appointed John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Robert R. Livingston, the Roger Sherman to draft a statement of independence for the colonies, with Jefferson assigned to perform the actual writing of the document. In writing the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson drew heavily upon the idea of natural rights and individual liberty. These ideas have been widely expressed by 17th century philosopher John Locke and others at the time. The beginning of the document explains that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson then listed formal grievances against Great Britain, thus justifying the colony's decision to completely break away from the mother country. On July 2, 1776, the document was sent to Congress for consideration and debate. 2 days later, on July 4th, 1776, Congress unanimously adopted the Declaration of Independence. Of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, 8 were foreign-born. They included Button Winton, England; Francis Lewis, Wales; Robert Morris, England; James Smith, Ireland; George Taylor, Ireland; Matthew Thornton, Ireland; James Wilson, Scotland; and John Witherspoon, Scotland. In Declaration of Independence, a painting by John Trumbull, sorry, did I show you a picture here? Oh, let me show you this picture. This is a destruction of tea at the Boston Harbor, commonly known as the Boston Tea Party. Right here is another photo, and this is the Committee of Congress drafting Declaration of Independence. And, this is the one as well. Here you have in Declaration of Independence a painting by John Trumbull, Thomas Jefferson, and his committee, present at the formal statement of independence from Great Britain. The Declaration of Independence, Act of Second Continental Action of Second Continental Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of 13 United States of America. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind required that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness; that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed; that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the rights of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed through the light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurped passions, pursuing the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new guard for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former system of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurped passions, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his absence should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the rights of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them, and formidable to tyrants only. This is long, by the way. There's more. There's like a lot more to this. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilations, have returned to the people at large for their exercise. The state remaining in the meantime exposed to all of the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of offices to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to jurisdiction foreign to our constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us many in cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, dissolution, and tyranny, which already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, perfidy, per, perf, perf, perfidy, I don't know, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous, barbarous ages, and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on our high seas to bear arms against our country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us. He has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions we have petitioned to redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in the attentions of our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these passions, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. Consanguinity, I don't know. We must therefore acquiesce the in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Signed by order and in behalf of the Congress, John Hancock, President. Attest, Charles Thompson, Secretary. Okay. The Federalist Papers, 1787-1788, by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. Following the Constitutional Convention in 1787, a national debate began concerning whether or not to ratify the proposed United States Constitution. Newspapers across the nation published essays and letters on both sides, for and against ratification. The most famous of these writings became known as the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were a series of 85 essays written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison under the pen name Publius. The essays were published primarily in Independent Journal and the New York Packet, and their purpose was to urge New York delegates to ratify the proposed United States Constitution. In 1788, the essays were published in a bound volume. The essays explain particular provisions of the United States Constitution specific detail. Alexander Hamilton and James Madison were both members of the United States of the Constitutional Conventions, and for this reason, the Federalist Papers offer an exciting look into the intentions of those drafting the United States Constitution. Today, the Federalist Papers are considered to be one of the most important historical documents on the founding principles of the United States form of government. Notable excerpts. Number 2. Is there a photo? Oh, okay, here's the Federalist Papers. Number 2, John Jay. To all general purposes, we have uniformly been one people, each individual citizen everywhere enjoying the same national rights, privileges, and protections. Number 22, Alexander Hamilton. The fabric of American empire ought to rest on the solid basis of the consent of the people. The streams of national power ought to flow from that pure, original foundation of all legitimate authority. Number 42, James Madison. Every man who loves peace, every man who loves his country, every man who loves liberty, ought to have it ever before his eyes, that he may cherish in his heart a due attachment to the Union of America, and be able to set a due value on the means of preserving it. Number 46, James Madison. The ultimate authority resides in the people alone. Number 51, Alexander Hamilton or James Madison. But what is government itself, but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. Some photos. That's John Jay. Then we have here Alexander Hamilton. Sorry. James Madison. The Constitution, 1787, of the United States. In May 1787, 55 delegates from each of the 13 states, with the exception of Rhode Island, convened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to revise the Articles of Confederation and create a more centralized form of government for the United States. Two competing plans were presented to the delegates: Edmund Randall's Virginia Plan and William Paterson's New Jersey Plan. New Jersey. The Virginia Plan would create a more powerful central government with three components: an executive, legislative, and judiciary sharing power. The New Jersey Plan would revise and amend the current Articles of Confederation to give Congress control over taxes and trade, but still provide each of the states with the basic autonomy at the local level. Though extensive debate, it soon became clear that amending the Articles of Confederation would not be sufficient, and a new form of government would need to be established. The most contentious issues included how much power the central government would have, how the states would be represented in Congress, and how these representatives would be elected. The final document, which was signed on September 17th, 1787, combined ideas from both the Virginia and the New Jersey plans, creating a central government with three branches and giving states equal representation in the Senate regardless of state size. Representation in the lower chamber, the House of Representatives, was based on state population. The Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land and serves as the basic legal framework for the United States system of government. It has lasted longer than any other nation's constitution. It has been revised or amended only 27 times since 1787. James Madison, a Virginia delegate and fourth President of the United States, is known as the father of the Constitution. Here's a photo. Okay. Preamble to the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Okay, I thought there would be more. The Bill of Rights, 1791. Following the successful creation of a new constitution, which outlined the form and structure of the United States government, a public debate concerning the need to protect individual freedoms arose. Many believed that guarantees of individual rights were not needed because under the Constitution, the people held all power not specifically granted to the central government. Others, with the memory of British tyranny fresh in their minds, demanded a list of individual rights that would be guaranteed to all citizens. As the debate wore on, Thomas Jefferson, then serving as ambassador to France, wrote a letter to James Madison back in America stating, "The Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth, general or particular, and what no just government should refuse or rest on inference." This position quickly gained popularity and a compromise was finally reached. Several states in their formal ratification of the Constitution asked for such amendments, while others ratified the Constitution with the understanding that amendments would be offered during the first meeting of Congress. On September 25, 1789, the first Congress of the United States offered 12 amendments to the Constitution that addressed individual freedoms. 2 were not ratified immediately, but the remaining 10 were ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures on December 15, 1791. These first 10 amendments became known as the Bill of Rights. Here's the copy of the 12 amendments. Emancipation Proclamation, Abraham Lincoln, 1863. As the fierce fighting of the American Civil War entered its third year, President Abraham Lincoln acted to give a new war aim to the soldiers of the Union Army. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which effectively freed the slaves in the states, opening rebellion against the United States. The Civil War quickly became not only a fight to preserve the Union, but also a cause for the spread of the freedom for all Americans. Many of the recently freed slaves joined the Union Army or Navy and fought bravely for the freedom of others. The proclamation was greeted with celebration in Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., and elsewhere, in order for these words to become reality. However, much more fighting was still to come. By the end of the American Civil War in 1865, almost 200,000 African Americans had fought for the Union. In December of that year, a U.S. Constitution was amended to free all slaves living in any part of the United States. The 13th Amendment completed the work that the Emancipation Proclamation had begun, ending all slavery in the United States. First reading of the Emancipation Proclamation of the President Lincoln by Francis Bicknell Carpenter. Okay. Just a moment. I actually just received a letter, an email back from the community. It's an automated thing. Okay. This is also a lengthy read. The Emancipation Proclamation, January 1, 1863. By the President of the United States of America, a proclamation. Whereas on the 22nd day of September, in the year of our Lord 1862, a proclamation was issued by the President of the United States containing, among other things, the following, to wit, that on the first day of January in the year of our Lord 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state and the people thereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then thenceforth and forever free, and the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authority thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons, and will do no act or acts to repress such persons, or any of them in any efforts they may make for their actual freedom. That the executive will, on the first day of January aforesaid by proclamation, designate the state and parts of the state, if any, in which the people thereof, respectively, shall then be in rebellion against the United States, and the fact that any state or the people thereof shall on that day be, in good faith, represented in Congress of the United States by members chosen thereto at elections wherein a majority of the qualified voters of such state shall have participated, shall, in the absence of strong countervailing testimony, be deemed conclusive evidence that such state and the people thereof are not then in rebellion against the United States. Now therefore I, Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States, by virtue of the power in me vested as the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States in time of actual armed rebellion against the authority and government of the United States, and as a fit and necessary war measure for suppressing said rebellion, due on this first day of January, in the year of our Lord 1863, and in accordance with my purpose to do so publicly, proclaimed for the full period of 100 days, from the day first above mentioned, order and designate as the states and parts of the states wherein the people thereof respectively are this day in rebellion against the United States. The following to wit: Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, except the parishes of St. Bernard, Plaquemines, Jefferson, St. John, St. Charles, St. James, Ascension, Assumption, Terrebonne, Lafourche, St. Mary, St. Martin, and Orleans, including the city of New Orleans, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, except the 48 counties designated as West Virginia, and also the counties of Berkeley, Accomack, Northampton, Elizabeth City, York, Princess Anne, and Norfolk, including the cities of Norfolk and Portsmouth, and which accepted parts are for the present left precisely as if this proclamation were not issued. And by the virtue of the power and for the purpose aforesaid, I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves within said designated states and parts of the state are and henceforward shall be free, and that the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authorities thereof, will recognize and maintain freedom of said persons. And I hereby enjoin upon the people so declared to be free, to abstain from all violence, unless in necessary self-defense, and I recommend to them that, in all cases when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages. And I further declare and make known that such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States to garrison forts, positions, and stations in other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service. And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice, warranted by the Constitution upon military necessity, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind, and the gracious favor of Almighty God, in witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the United States to be affixed, done at the city of Washington, this first day of January, in the year of our Lord 1863, and of the independence of the United States of America, and the 87th, by the President Abraham Lincoln, William H. Seward, Secretary of State. Oh, look at him. Abraham Lincoln. President Abraham Lincoln on the battlefield of Antietam, October 1862. The Battle of Antietam ended the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia's first invasion into the North and led to President Lincoln's issuance of of the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Next thing, landmark decision of the U.S. Supreme Court. Landmark decisions. No, this is gonna be good. Should I? You know what? It's been 1 hour. I'm gonna take another break.